It's a privilege to meet you. I'm Dee Plomassy. When I'm not moderating international negotiations or promoting world peace, I work as an Acme good guide. This happens to be one of the most fascinating states in the USA. So if you're ready for the grand tour, let's begin. Here's a popular spot on the Washington Mall, the Museum of Natural History. If you're looking for dinosaur bones, this is the place. You'll also find lots of other exhibits on the history of our planet. Will you find a crook? That I can't say. I'm amazed by the White House, and here's why. In a lot of countries, the leaders keep their distance from the people. But not here. The first family lives in a house that thousands of tourists visit every week. Just think, you could be admiring the White House banisters while the president brushes his teeth only a few rooms away. Now that's democracy. Look closely at the Washington Monument. See how the color changes halfway up? That's because they halted construction during the Civil War and didn't get going again for another 25 years. By that time, they couldn't find marble that matched the original. With all the political folks here in Washington always ready to argue, it's a wonder they ever finished the monument at all. There's no king in Washington, D.C., but here's the castle. That's the nickname of the Smithsonian headquarters. This was the first of the dozen Smithsonian museums now existing here in Washington. And no, they never dug a moat around it. Washington wouldn't be the capital without a Capitol building, and here it is. Under that dome, you'll find senators and congressmen, both Republican and Democrat. These are the men and women who make the laws of the USA. Your job, Gumshoe, is to catch the thieves who break those laws. Well then, until we meet again. Welcome to Montgomery, the capital of Alabama. Let's take a stroll and see the sights.
I had a dream the other night when everything was still. Thought I saw my Georgia belle coming down the hill. Born to Georgia, born out of stem, born to Georgia, where my life away.
For 100 years, Alabama's wealth was based on cotton, growing it, selling it, and shipping it out to make clothes for the world. These days, the state is more economically diverse. But if you hear someone mention the land of cotton, they probably mean this place. The civil rights movement began here in Montgomery in 1955. When Rosa Parks refused to move to the back of a bus, even though the law said black people couldn't sit up front. She touched off a movement that challenged racially discriminatory laws throughout the country. Here's my favorite spot in Montgomery, the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. In the 1950s, Martin Luther King Jr. preached here, promoting freedom, equality, and nonviolence, the perfect ingredients for true democracy, if you ask me. Not far from here stands the first White House of the Confederacy, where President Jefferson Davis lived at the start of the Civil War. He left Montgomery after a few months, but didn't take the house with him. Mobile homes didn't come until later.
To Atlanta just to look around. Things don't suit me, I find another town. Born to Georgia, born out to stand, born to...
See that big dome? Well, it's not a planetarium, so it must be a capitol. The Alabama Capitol building, to be exact. The state government has done its business here ever since 1846. Well then, until we meet again.
Where will I go?
Here we are in Iowa, Des Moines to be exact. Let's have a look around. Now you probably recognize this fellow. This statue of Lincoln was based on a famous photo of old Abe reading to his son, Tad. There are tons of statues depicting Lincoln as a leader, but this is the only one known that portrays Lincoln as a father. Lucky for Tad, Abe was smart enough to make both a great president and a great dad. Iowa's capital was originally Iowa City, not Des Moines. But since Des Moines is in the center of the state, some folks thought it would make a better location for a capital. It took a lot of negotiation to make the move happen. But remember, negotiating is always better than fighting. Native people lived in this area long before Iowa became a U.S. state. In fact, scientists have found 3,000-year-old human bones nearby. Even the state's name, Iowa, came from a native Indian tribe. In a sense, we're all guests here, so remember, be polite. We're not far from the Amana colonies, villages founded in the 1850s by a German religious group who still farm together and make appliances and tools. Amana residents share all their belongings because acquiring personal wealth goes against their beliefs. That would be a tough idea for Carmen to understand, wouldn't it? And here's the Iowa State Capitol building. See the Golden Dome? That's real gold plating. Over 200 ounces of it spread out ever so thin. The craftspeople who built this place took 15 years to do it. They took their time, but they got it right. Well then, until we meet again. Hello, and welcome to Maryland. Let's walk the streets of Baltimore. Francis Scott Key wrote the Star-Spangled Banner right here on a ship in Baltimore Harbor during a battle in the War of 1812. It's a fine song from an awful war, but then all wars are awful. If you see big crowds, they're probably heading for the National Aquarium, home to more than 5,000 water creatures, ranging from shrimp and sharks to whales. Over 1.5 million visitors come here each year, and one of those visitors might be working for Carmen. We could board the USS Constitution, but it's permanently docked, so we wouldn't get far. This grand vessel served 146 years in the U.S. Navy. They finally retired it when the warranty ran out. Many of Baltimore's baseball fans claim the legendary Babe Ruth as their own. He played mostly in Boston and New York, but he was born right here in a little house on Emory Street. Today it's a museum dedicated to the Babe. Ah, yes, the cafes and shops of Harbor Place. Baltimore's harbor area became a bit run down in the 1960s and 70s, but in the 80s it bounced back, and bustling malls like this one helped. Maybe next time you're here we'll have a fine meal together down by the waterfront. Well then, until we meet again. Welcome to colonial Williamsburg, Virginia, a reconstructed city from the days before the American Revolution. Let's take a walk. Here's the stately home of George Wythe, a famous lawyer and judge who was the first Virginian to sign the Declaration of Independence. Wythe was Thomas Jefferson's mentor and greatly influenced Jefferson's ideas about law, politics, and government. And just like his student, Wythe had great taste in big brick houses. Quite a few of the United States' founders lived in or near Williamsburg. After all, this was the first colony to declare independence from England. Richard Henry Lee, Patrick Henry, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, and other founding fathers called Virginia home. Williamsburg today, as a small, elegant town, doesn't seem too important. But in colonial times, Williamsburg was a crucial place, a training ground of sorts for the Virginians who led the American Revolution. It was the biggest and richest of England's colonies with great political power. Unfortunately for England, all this power and wealth eventually convinced the American colonists that it was time to start controlling their own fate, independently of England. Here's the apothecary, sort of an old-fashioned pharmacy. Dr. William McKenna worked here. If you needed a medical procedure, say leeching or bloodletting, he was the man to see. It wasn't a great idea to get sick back then. Here's the governor's palace. Before the Revolution, England's king sent his governor here to rule the colony. But after gaining their independence, Virginians ruled themselves. And one of the first things they did was move the capital from Williamsburg to Richmond. Well then, until we meet again. We're in Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. There's a lot to see, so let's start looking. This is John Brown's fort. In 1859, the anti-slavery preacher led a raid on the U.S. Armory here in Harper's Ferry. This is the only building left here from that time. Brown's raid heightened the tensions growing between the North and South, and the Civil War broke out soon afterwards. Before 1861, there was no state called West Virginia. But when Virginia split from the Union at the start of the Civil War, the people in its western counties decided to separate from Virginia and join the North. For a while, they called their state Kanawha, but the name didn't stick, and West Virginia soon became the new state's official name.
The sign on the highway says it's 30 miles to go. Just as well 10,000.
The Baltimore Railroad runs over this bridge. Before the Civil War, those tracks brought prosperity to Harper's Ferry. It takes people and commerce to make a city grow, and that's exactly what the railroad carried into town.
Rain with snow. But that's not gonna stop me. I know just where I'm bound. And if you ever look for me.
Here, where the Shenandoah and Potomac rivers come together, once stood the U.S. Armory, a place packed full of weapons and ammunition. The Confederate Army destroyed it during the Civil War to prevent the Union from using the deadly armament against them. Now the place is a park. A far better choice, if you ask me.
Over I'll be found. If you ever look for me, you know where I'll be found.
Up until the 1860s, Harper's Ferry was a big, bustling port with factories and lots of people. But because of its strategic location between the North and South, it was a prime place for fighting during the Civil War, and as a result, the town was almost totally destroyed. It never grew back into a big city, and I hear that's just fine with the local folks who like it quiet. Well then, until we meet again.